Welcome back, everyone. And I really hope that the first part of the speech wasn't that hard. Anyway, as I mentioned, there was a life-size wooden effigy of Elizabeth I, and people who saw it were like, "Wow!" And she looked so real. People just were sobbing or crying. They were so emotional about this effigy because it looked so real. And as I mentioned, thanks to the printing press, those who were not able to see the funeral, to see the procession, actually received pamphlets that were written by witnesses. And in that way, they could experience at least a written version of the funeral procession. Now, we are going to move on. We're going to jump a few more centuries and to the end of Victorian times. For 4 decades of a 64-year reign, Queen Victoria wore black mourning clothes in memory of her late husband, Prince Albert. You might have heard about Albert and Victoria, Victoria and Albert, really cute couple. But yeah, after he died, she was always wearing black. So you would have expected that she was also going to wear black, um, after passing away. So when she died on the 22nd of January 1901 at the age of 81, she stipulated that everything was going to be white. She was wearing white, and white was the signature color of her funeral. She was buried in her wedding veil, and her coffin was covered in white and gold. And there was also a gun carriage that was being carried by white horses. So the presence of black, which was seen as state funerals centuries before, was replaced with a regal purple to sit alongside the symbolic flashes of white. But it was the style of Victoria's funeral which proved its most enduring legacy. Previous monarchs had been buried after processions led by senior courtiers or councillors. However, Victoria wished to be treated as a soldier's daughter, with the military involved for the first time. So they took the lead role in proceedings, including conveying her coffin on a gun carriage. And it was this gun carriage which Victoria had seen, she had admired at the funeral of the Duke of Albany many years before. And something happened at the funeral that changed the choreography of state funerals ever since. Now, the legend states that a horse at Windsor Station prompted an intervention. So Royal Navy sailors, they were like improvising, rigging ropes to Victoria's gun carriage, and they were taking the coffin to the funeral service at St. George Chapel inside the castle. However, there was an eyelet that failed. This eyelet was linking the carriage to the horse's reins, and an officer saw what had happened, and he said that suddenly sailors tried to save the coffin, to save try to do something about it. So they stepped in, and they were able to fix the problem quickly. And for this reason, the Royal Navy is also honoring and conveying British monarchs' last resting place. So what about Queen Elizabeth II's father, King George VI? So his funeral was, in many ways, the most loyal so far to the royal convention that was established by Queen Victoria and her successors. Victoria did not lie in state in Westminster Hall, though. Her successors did. Establishing the practice is so, you saw it vividly in the most recent days. So what people do, they just pay homage to the dead sovereign by walking past the coffin. Now, George VI was brought to London by train, and he was lying in state for 3 days. And about almost 300,000 people were witnessing this funeral procession. However, it is important to note that more people had attended in person the funeral of George VI's father. But why did this happen? Because George VI's funeral was televised. It was broadcast on TV. So people were at home watching his funeral. Now, the king's death, King George VI's death, also established the solemn commentary that you might have listened to on the BBC News, for example, during the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. And basically this commentary started with her father's death. Now, in the case of Elizabeth II, there was a significant change, and she was the first monarch since George II in 1760 to have a funeral that included a service at Westminster Abbey. The formal funeral service for the sovereign had been held only at St. George's Chapel in Windsor since 1820. Well, thankfully, the unfortunate events of William the Conqueror's funeral are now a thing of the past and just a grim episode in the history of royal funerals. From Elizabeth I's lead fine coffin to Victoria's gun carriage to George VI's televised audience, the state funeral of a monarch has come to its current incarnation thanks to all of these, to a blend of centuries-old traditions and conventions that have been improved and that have been fine-tuned to suit the modern monarch. Thank you so much for your attention.